remember the day they discharged me from the hospital, my heart still weak but full of hope, believing that the warmth of home and family would be enough medicine to carry me through the rest of my recovery. The nurses had been kind, the doctors, confident, and though the surgery left me trembling and thinner than ever, I told myself again and again that survival meant I was lucky, that I had a second chance to spend with my daughter and her children, that the lonely nights with monitors beeping beside me would end the moment I stepped into my daughter's house where laughter and comfort waited. My cardigan hung too loosely on my shoulders, a sad reminder of the weight I had lost, but I folded it neatly as though preparing myself for a return to normal life. I had dialed Adeline's number with hands that shook more from medication than nerves, praying she would answer with the same sweet tone she once used as a little girl whenever she called out, "Daddy." But her voice that day was not warm, not welcoming, only sharp and distracted, layered with background noise from cash, registers, and impatient customers at her workplace. "Dad, I'm busy right now. Find yourself a motel or something." The line went dead before I could even explain how hard it was to walk, how terrifying it felt to be alone after they cracked open my chest to repair the very organ that once carried her inside me as I raised her. I sat there staring at the phone, my finger frozen above the redial button, telling myself she must have been stressed, that surely it was a joke, that no daughter could truly mean such cruelty to her father. Still, the silence of the hospital room mocked me, the buzzing of the dial tone stinging sharper than my incision. When the taxi finally came, I carried my little bag, the same bag Martha, my late wife, had packed for me with glasses, a book, and a sweater I never wore. Like it was my last treasure, and I whispered to myself that everything would be better once I reached home, the home I had helped them build with the money from my own house. The city blurred past the taxi window, gray skies pressing low as if warning me of what I did not yet know. But even in that gloom, I clung to the picture of Tommy's baseball cards scattered on the kitchen table, Lily's drawings taped proudly to the refrigerator, and Adeline waiting with a guilty smile saying she was sorry for the phone call and that she was just tired. That was the vision that carried me to the doorstep of 1420 Oak Street, the house I had painted last spring with my own hands, convinced I was painting not just wood but a future for all of us together. Yet when the door opened and I stepped inside, instead of the familiar scent of pancakes or crayons, I found silence and shadows. My chair shoved into a corner, my photos turned face down, and strange belongings crowding my nightstand as if my very existence had been erased. My heart pounded, not from the surgery but from a dawning horror, the realization that something sacred had shifted while I lay under anesthesia. I stood in the hallway clutching my small bag, the silence pressing down like a weight heavier than any hospital machine. I called out softly, "Adeline?" hoping she would come rushing down the stairs, arms open, voice trembling with apology. But instead, it was her husband, Martin, who appeared from the living room, his tall frame filling the doorway, his eyes already hard and impatient, like I was an intruder rather than the man who had given everything for this home. He didn't say hello, didn't ask about the scar still raw across my chest, didn't even glance at the bandages peeking from beneath my shirt. Instead, he folded his arms and said coldly, "You can't stay here anymore. This is our space." His words struck me harder than any scalpel, sharper than any stitch. For a moment I thought I misheard him, that maybe he meant something else, but then Adeline appeared behind him, her eyes avoiding mine, her lips pressed in a line that told me she would not defend me. "Dad, we've talked about this," she murmured, though I had never heard a single word of this so-called talk. My knees trembled and I had to grip the banister just to stay standing, my breath shallow as though the hospital oxygen mask had been ripped away too soon. "Talked about what?" I asked, my voice breaking. "This is my home too. I sold everything, every piece of my life to build this place for you, for my grandchildren. Where else would I go?" Martin's hand tightened on the door frame as he stepped closer, his tone growing sharper. "That was your choice. You gave us the money, yes, but that doesn't mean you get to control our lives. You're making things difficult, and Adeline and I agree. It's better if you leave." My daughter still wouldn't meet my gaze. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her blouse. the same nervous habit she had as a child when she was caught in a lie. But now there was no childish innocence left in it. I looked at her, desperate, whispering, "Adeline, honey, please. I just came out of surgery. I can barely walk. I thought I'd be here to rest, to recover, to be with my family." She finally looked up, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw her old self, the girl who used to braid my hair when I fell asleep on the couch. The girl who once said I was her hero, but that flicker vanished as quickly as it came. "Dad," she said flatly, "Martin's right. Things are different now. We can't take care of you. You'll figure something out." As Emily's little footsteps faded upstairs, the silence that followed was heavier than any storm I had ever weathered. I stood in the same hallway where I had once taught Adeline how to walk, where I had carried her in my arms after she scraped her knee, where her laughter used to echo like music. And now that very space had turned into a courtroom where I was being judged unworthy of belonging. My chest ached, both from the fresh wound of surgery and the deeper wound of betrayal. And when Martin stepped closer, his eyes cold as steel, telling me again that I needed to leave before things became uglier, I felt the world collapse inside.
Me? How could my daughter, my only family, remain silent while her husband pushed me out like an old chair no longer useful?
I wanted to scream, to shake her, to remind her that when her mother died, it was me who held our little world together. It was me who gave up sleep, gave up joy, gave up my future, just so she could have one. But my voice failed, caught between grief and disbelief, and all that escaped was a whisper. "Adeline, is this really who you are now?" Her eyes glistened, lips trembling as if her heart fought against the decision, but in the end, fear of losing her husband outweighed the love for her father, and when she lowered her gaze, unable to look me in the eyes, I knew my place in her home, in her life, had ended. Not with death, but with betrayal. I walked out of that house slowly, each step heavier than the last, as if the very ground itself resisted me leaving the place I had once built dreams in. And though the night air was cool, my body burned with the heat of shame and heartbreak. The streetlights flickered against the wet pavement, reminding me of the countless nights I had stood by that very road waiting for Adeline to return from school, waiting to carry her books, waiting to ask her about her day. And now I found myself clutching nothing but an old coat, exiled from the world I had created, stripped not by strangers but by my own flesh and blood. I wanted to believe it was all a mistake, that any moment the door would burst open and she would run out calling me Papa, begging me to stay. But the silence behind me was merciless, sealing the truth tighter with every passing second. And when a distant thunder rolled across the sky, I realized it was not just a storm outside. It was the storm of abandonment tearing through the last fragments of my soul, leaving me wandering the dark streets with no home, no family, and no reason, except the hollow echo of a daughter's betrayal ringing in my ears like a curse I would carry until my dying breath. The rain began to fall as I dragged my weary body down the empty street, each drop striking my face like needles, washing away the last traces of dignity I had left. And though my legs trembled with weakness from both age and surgery, it was the weight in my chest that nearly crushed me, the unbearable knowledge that my own daughter, the child I once carried on these very shoulders through storms just like this, had chosen to cast me into the cold for the comfort of a man who saw me as nothing more than a burden. I wandered past houses glowing warmly from within, families gathered around dinner tables, laughter spilling out through half-open windows, and every sound of joy stabbed me deeper, reminding me of the home I had lost not through death or disaster, but through betrayal. The world blurred before my eyes, the mix of rain and tears clouding my vision, and for a moment I stumbled, clutching a lamppost to steady myself, whispering into the night, "God, why is love so easily forgotten?" Yet no answer came, only the howling wind that seemed to mock me as I shuffled onward, my shoes sinking into puddles, my clothes clinging to me like a shroud. I thought of Adeline's first steps, the way she once stretched her little arms toward me when frightened, the nights she curled up against me after her mother's death, seeking safety in my heartbeat, and I could not reconcile that child with the woman who now sat silently in her warm home while her father was cast into the storm. A faint ache spread across my chest, sharper than before, making me wince and gasp for breath, but I pushed forward, unwilling to collapse in the gutter like a stray dog, though every fiber of my being cried out for rest. The city that once felt familiar now seemed foreign and hostile, its streets stretching endlessly like a labyrinth designed to swallow the unwanted. And with every step I felt less like a man and more like a ghost wandering unseen, unheard, unloved. A passing car splashed water onto me, the driver not even sparing a glance, and I realized then how invisible I'd become, how quickly the world discards those it no longer finds useful. And as the clock from a distant church struck midnight, echoing across the rain-soaked silence, I sank onto a cold stone bench beneath the trembling branches of an old tree, wrapping my arms around myself as if I could hold together the pieces of a shattered soul. And though my body shivered violently, it was not the cold that broke me, but the silence of a daughter who once called me her hero, but now saw me as nothing more than a shadow to be erased. I sat trembling on that cold stone bench beneath the half-dead tree, rain dripping through its leaves and sliding down my wrinkled face, my hands shaking not just from the chill, but from the heaviness of betrayal. And though I tried to close my eyes to rest, the world refused to let me forget. For every drop of rain sounded like the echo of my daughter's laughter from years ago. Every distant horn reminded me of the nights I worked late just to afford her education. Every gust of wind whispered the same question over and over: how could she? And my chest throbbed as if my very heart rebelled against continuing. Yet still I clung to breath as if some hidden part of me hoped she would come rushing down the street any second, screaming my name, begging for forgiveness. But the road stretched empty, silent, uncaring, and so I remained nothing more than a lonely silhouette hunched under a storm that seemed made for me alone. I remembered carrying her in my arms through another rainstorm when she was 5, her tiny fingers clutching my neck as she cried about thunder, and I had whispered, "Don't worry, Daddy will never let you go." Words that once meant everything, but now mocked me, for I had been let go in the cruelest way, abandoned not by fate but by choice. And as the night deepened, hunger gnawed at me. Yet I had no coin, no home, not even the strength to beg. And so I watched as life passed me by. Strangers hurrying with umbrellas, couples rushing into taxis, all too busy to notice the broken man who sat among puddles like discarded trash. Then, as if the heavens themselves sought to test me, a sharp pain shot through my chest, so sudden I gasped and clutched at my heart, my body folding inward, but no one came. No hand reached out, no voice cried in concern, and the realization that I could very well die right there unseen broke me more than the pain itself. For I had lived for love, sacrificed for family, and yet in my hour of need I was invisible, an unwanted shadow. Still I forced myself to rise, staggering down the slick pavement, each step a war against collapse, and I thought of my late wife, her smile, her gentle voice, how she had once told me, "No matter what happens, you must live for her." And, though I had lived, it now seemed my obedience had only led me to this. For the very child I had lived for had turned into the architect of my ruin. My mind swirled between past and present, memories flashing like lightning. Her first day of school, her wedding day, the moment she chose him over me, and with each image came another blow, until I found myself on my knees in the gutter, rainwater soaking through my clothes as the city blurred into streaks of light and shadow. And though cars passed, none stopped. Though faces turned, none lingered. And so I crawled to the wall of a closed shop and pressed my back against it, sliding down until I was seated again, my breath shallow, my vision dimming. It was then I heard voices. Faint at first, then closer. 2 young men arguing about whether to approach, and finally, one did, crouching beside me, his voice sharp with concern. "Sir, are you okay? Do you need help?" And though I wanted to answer, to tell him my name, to say I was a father, a man, a human being, all that left my lips was a whisper. "Adeline," before darkness tugged at me, pulling me downward like the tide. I felt hands lifting me, shouts calling for an ambulance, the blare of sirens cutting through the rain. and then the harsh brightness of hospital lights burned my eyes as figures in masks swarmed around me, voices overlapping, heart failure risk, BP dropping. Prepare him now. But none of it mattered, for in that haze of machines and panic I thought only of her, the daughter who would never know how her father spent his final conscious night, not in anger but in grief, not cursing her name but whispering it like a prayer. And as the mask lowered over my face, I wondered if she would even come to claim my body, or if I would leave this world as I had sat on that bench, alone, forgotten, unseen, while she slept soundly in the home I had built with my life's blood, dreaming perhaps of riches, of love, of a future where her father's memory was nothing but a shadow locked outside in the rain. The rain poured heavier, as if the heavens themselves wept at my misery, soaking me to the bone until my clothes clung like a second skin. And yet I walked on, driven not by hope but by a hollow numbness that carried me through the storm. My shoes squelched with every step, mud splattering up my legs. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the ache of betrayal gnawing inside me. The endless replay of Adeline's face turned away, her eyes averted in shame or perhaps indifference, and the echo of her silence was louder than any scream. For silence meant choice. Silence meant she accepted my exile. Silence meant her loyalty belonged to the man who sought to erase me from her life. As I trudged through the drenched streets, memories rose unbidden like ghosts tormenting me. The time she fell from her bicycle and I ran barefoot across gravel to lift her, bleeding myself but cradling her until her tears stopped. The nights of hunger I endured so she could eat. The winters when I pawned my own coat just to buy her shoes. The birthdays I worked double shifts to afford even the smallest cake. And now, all of it seemed worthless, swept away like leaves in the current of greed and manipulation. The thunder cracked above, rattling the windows of tall buildings, and lightning flashed, illuminating my reflection in a puddle. A frail old man with hollow eyes, sagging skin, and a beard streaked with gray, unrecognizable even to myself. And I thought bitterly, perhaps that is why she cast me aside, because I no longer looked like the strong protector she once knew. Because in her eyes I was no longer her father, but a relic of poverty. A weight dragging down the glittering image she wished to show the world. My chest tightened again, a sharp pang radiating through my arm, and I staggered, nearly falling to the ground, clutching a wall for support as passers-by hurried past with umbrellas, not one stopping, their faces lit by the cold glow of their phones, their laughter cutting through the night while my gasps for air went unnoticed. And I realized with cruel clarity that in this vast city of millions, I was utterly alone. Yet even as pain racked my body, my mind refused to let go of her, of Adeline, and I whispered her name into the storm, the syllables torn from my throat like a prayer. But the rain swallowed the sound before it could travel, leaving me unheard, unseen, forgotten. I stumbled onward, drawn by instinct toward the park where I once took her as a child, where she chased pigeons with her tiny feet and laughed until her cheeks flushed pink. And when I reached the old wooden bench beneath the oak tree, I collapsed onto it, my breath shallow, my body trembling violently, and I lay back, staring at the branches swaying against the stormy sky, thinking that perhaps it was fitting to end where it all began, in a place of memories, though the bitterness of knowing she would not come haunted me, for no child should let a parent die alone. Yet here I was, fading into darkness with only the storm for company. Tears mingled with the rain upon my cheeks as I thought of my late wife, how she begged me on her deathbed to protect Adeline, to love her double for the both of us. And I had sworn it, keeping my vow for decades, sacrificing all I had. And yet, now as my strength slipped away, I wondered if I had failed her too. For our daughter had grown into a woman who could abandon her father without a second thought. My vision blurred, the edges darkening, and I closed my eyes, surrendering to the pull of sleep, perhaps eternal. But just before I drifted fully, I felt a hand on my shoulder, a stranger perhaps, or an angel come to carry me. And a voice broke through the storm, urgent and distant, calling for help, footsteps running, the wail of sirens in the distance, and I thought with my last fading spark of consciousness, maybe, just maybe, the world had not completely forgotten me, though the one person I longed for remained absent. locked away in the prison of her silence, and if this was my end, it would not be the storm, nor hunger, nor strangers who killed me, but the absence of her love, the emptiness left by a daughter's betrayal, an emptiness deeper than the grave itself. The night deepened, and I could feel the weight of exhaustion pressing down upon me, yet my mind would not rest, circling endlessly around memories that cut like glass. For though my daughter's betrayal had shattered me, it was the silence that echoed louder than any words, the silence of a child who had chosen wealth and pride over the man who had given her life. And as I sat drenched on that cold stone bench, I saw shadows moving across the street, strangers hurrying home beneath umbrellas, couples laughing together under dim streetlights, their warmth and companionship reminding me of everything I had lost, not just tonight but across the years when slowly, without realizing it, I had given away pieces of myself until there was nothing left but this broken shell of a father. My thoughts drifted back to nights in a small wooden house when the storm winds rattled the roof, and Adeline, then only 6, would crawl into my bed trembling, whispering, "Papa, don't let the storm take me." And I would hold her close, stroking her hair, promising that as long as I breathed, no storm could ever harm her. Yet here I was now, cast into a storm not of nature but of cruelty, abandoned by the very soul I swore to protect. And the cruelest part of all was not that she had forgotten my sacrifices, but that she had convinced herself I was unworthy of her love, as if years of carrying her on my shoulders, of working until my hands bled, of starving quietly so she could eat, counted for nothing in the ledger of her new life. And as this realization tore through me, I felt the sharpest pain yet in my chest, my breath faltering as though my body itself could no longer carry the weight of grief. And for a fleeting moment I wondered if it might be better to let go, to close my eyes and let the storm swallow me, to vanish into the night with nothing but the memory of who I once was. But then an image flickered in my mind, a faint, fragile hope. The thought that perhaps someday Adeline would wake from this spell of arrogance and cruelty. Perhaps she would remember the warmth of my embrace, the lessons I taught her beneath the shade of old trees, the way I stitched her torn dress with trembling hands because she loved that dress more than anything. And perhaps she would search for me, calling out, weeping, realizing too late that fathers do not live forever. I clung to that vision even as darkness pressed upon my eyes, and with trembling fingers I reached into my pocket, pulling out the worn photograph I always carried, the one of her at 12 years old, smiling beside me on a summer day when the world still felt whole. And though the rain smeared the ink, I traced her face gently, whispering, "I'm still here, my little one, even if you've forgotten." And as my voice cracked into the night, a passerby finally noticed me, pausing, their eyes softening, with concern, asking if I was all right, but my lips could not form an answer. For how could I explain the depth of a wound carved not by strangers but by the very child who once called me her everything? The rain had soaked through my clothes, chilling me to the bone, yet I could not move, could not leave the bench because every step felt like abandoning the last shred of hope that maybe, somehow, Adeline would remember. And as I sat there shivering, the city's hum felt distant, muffled by the roaring storm inside my heart. And I remembered the first day she went to school, clutching my hand tightly as if letting go would mean she would vanish forever. How she had looked up at me with those wide, trusting eyes, and I had promised her a life full of possibilities, a life without fear. Yet now, all those promises had been twisted into memories I could almost feel but not touch. Memories that mocked me with their sweetness, and I realized how many times I had sacrificed silently, working 2 jobs while hiding the fatigue from her, pretending to smile when inside I was falling apart, all so she could chase dreams I had barely dared to imagine for myself. And the cruel irony was that she had grown to despise me for the very struggle that had built her life. For every late night I had spent fixing her school projects, every meal I had skipped so she could eat better, every stitch, every kiss, every tear I had wiped from her face, and the anger, the sadness, the ache inside me became a storm more furious than the rain, until I could barely breathe. And suddenly, as if the universe had heard my silent cries, a figure appeared under a flickering streetlight, tall, resolute, yet hesitant, moving closer with cautious steps, and I could see the contours of her face, her sharp jawline, The same eyes that once sparkled with innocent curiosity, now hardened, wary. And I realized it was her, Adeline, standing there with her arms folded, her posture rigid, as if preparing for battle rather than reunion. And my voice trembled as I whispered her name. Adeline. And she flinched, like a memory had struck her unexpectedly. Her lips parting to speak, then closing again, and I saw the flash of conflict in her eyes, the struggle between pride and something older, deeper, something she had buried beneath ambition and anger, and I remembered every argument, every silent treatment, every accusation she had thrown like knives at my chest. And yet here she was, human again, not the untouchable figure of wealth and power she had become, but the little girl who once clung to my hand in fear of the dark. And I wanted to reach out, to pull her close, to apologize for every harsh word I had said in frustration, every impatient moment, every failure to understand her heart. And as I rose slowly, my legs shaking from cold and exhaustion, I felt the immense weight of years of love and neglect. And she stepped back, her breath visible in the icy air. And in that pause, the world seemed to hold its breath, the rain softening, the night quieting, and I poured every ounce of my broken heart into the words that tumbled out, words I had practiced in the dark but never spoken aloud. I have never stopped loving you, never stopped believing in you, and never stopped hoping that one day you would see me not as a barrier, but as the father who always wanted the best for you. And she looked at me, eyes glistening with tears she refused to shed, trembling lips betraying the armor she had built around herself. And I realized that for the first time in years we were both vulnerable, stripped of pretense, and as I took a hesitant step closer, the memories of scraped knees, bedtime stories, whispered secrets, school plays, laughter echoing in sunlit rooms, all came rushing back like a tidal wave, crashing against the walls of resentment she had built. And for a moment, the distance between us felt bridgeable, like the fragile thread of love that never truly vanished, just weakened under neglect. And I wanted to tell her everything, every regret, every longing, every sleepless night I had spent worrying, imagining the worst, praying she would not turn into someone I could not reach. And I felt tears burn my eyes as the rain mixed with the salty ache inside me. And she swallowed, visibly struggling, before finally whispering, "Papa, I..." But her voice faltered, her pride warring with the tenderness that still lingered. And I reached out slowly, placing my hand over hers, feeling the cold, stiff fingers that were once soft and warm in my grasp. And in that touch, I could feel a pulse of recognition, a flicker of the little girl who had trusted me to chase away monsters. And I whispered again, my voice breaking, "I'm still here. Always." And for the first time in what felt like eternity, the gap between us trembled, unsteady, fragile, yet alive. And as the night stretched on, the storm outside quieted, and I realized that reconciliation would not come easily, that forgiveness would take time, that trust, once broken, could only be rebuilt slowly, piece by piece. But in that instant, as our hands lingered and the shadows of the city danced around us under the dim glow of the streetlights, I understood that love, though battered and bruised, still had the power to reach through the walls we built around ourselves, to bridge chasms of anger and misunderstanding, to remind us that no matter how far we stray, the roots of family run deep, and the night no longer felt like a prison, but like a fragile, trembling hope. A first step toward healing, toward finding the way back to one another, toward proving that even the most shattered hearts can learn to beat in unison once again. The rain had finally slowed to a drizzle, leaving the city slick and glistening under the dim orange streetlights. And yet I could not move, could not leave, because every step felt like abandoning the years of silent suffering, sacrifice, and love I had carried alone. And as I looked at Adeline, standing there stiff and distant yet undeniably present, I remembered not just her childhood, but the countless small moments that had shaped both our lives. The first time she had fallen off her bicycle and I had run to her side, bleeding knuckles and all, clutching her tightly and whispering that everything would be fine even though inside I had panicked. The nights when she woke screaming from nightmares and I had stayed awake holding her, rocking back and forth until her sobs subsided. The mornings when I had poured cereal into bowls while my own stomach ached with hunger, just so she could have something to start her day. The afternoons when I had skipped sleep to help her with homework, reading the same lines over and over, until I understood algebra enough to explain it to her. And yet now, standing across from her, I realized all those memories seemed invisible to her, like they had vanished into air, leaving only resentment, bitterness, and the pain of misunderstanding. And I felt the sting of tears I refused to let fall as she looked at me with that cool, controlled gaze, the expression of a person who had learned to armor herself against disappointment. And I remembered how she had once clung to my neck after a thunderstorm, laughing through the tears. And I had promised her I would always be there. And yet life had its cruel timing, stealing moments and replacing them with arguments and silence. And now, after all the years of struggle, after all the late nights working jobs I'd grown to hate just to provide her everything she wanted, she was a stranger to me, yet unmistakably my daughter, and I could feel the weight of every harsh word she had ever spoken like stones pressing against my chest, the echoes of slammed doors and cold stares ringing in my ears. And I realized that love alone was not enough to heal wounds left by pride, ego, and years of miscommunication. And still, I could not give up, could not let the storm of anger and misunderstanding win, because the memory of her small hand in mine, the tiny voice whispering, "I love you, Papa," in the dark, was stronger than any resentment, stronger than the years of silent battles. And as I stepped closer, careful not to startle her, I felt the tension radiating from her like heat, the kind of heat born of years of unresolved pain. And I remembered all the moments I had doubted myself, wondered if I had failed her irrevocably, questioned if love alone could sustain a relationship battered by pride, money, ambition, and the relentless march of time. And I thought of her mother, gone too soon, whose absence had left both of us adrift, struggling to navigate grief and expectation. And now it all converged in this single moment, standing under flickering streetlights, rain-soaked, hearts raw and trembling. And I whispered again, my voice hoarse from disuse, "Adeline, I have never stopped loving you. Never stopped believing in you, never stopped hoping that one day you would see me not as a barrier, but as your father who always wanted the best for you." And she swallowed, eyes glistening despite her best efforts, lips parting as if to respond, yet closing again in hesitation. And I understood that her pride, ambition, and fear had created walls that even I could not scale easily. And I thought of every lonely Christmas, every birthday I had quietly celebrated alone after she had stormed out in anger, every sleepless night spent wondering if I would ever hear her laugh again without bitterness, every whispered prayer for her safety, happiness, and soul. And I realized that even as she had built her life without me, even as resentment and misunderstanding had festered, the bond we shared, forged through decades of shared moments, pain, and love, still pulsed beneath the surface, fragile but undeniable. And I reached out slowly, trembling, placing my hand over hers, feeling the cold, stiff fingers that once fit perfectly in mine, and in that touch, I could feel a spark of recognition, a memory of scraped knees, bedtime stories, whispered secrets, and childhood laughter that had never truly left her. And I whispered again, my voice breaking, "I am still here. Always." And for a long moment, nothing happened. The air thick, with unshed tears, unspoken apologies, unhealed wounds. And then she exhaled shakily, the armor cracking, a flicker of vulnerability showing in her eyes. And I felt a cautious hope stirring inside me, the kind that has been denied for years, fragile, uncertain, yet more alive than I had dared to believe. And I remembered all the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the quiet endurance of pain I'd endured, not for recognition, not for reward, but for the hope that one day she would see the depth of my love, the breadth of my struggle, and the unwavering faith I had in her. And I realized in that moment, under the dripping eaves of the streetlights, that love, though battered, bruised, and stretched thin by time, distance, and pride, still had the power to bridge gaps, to mend hearts, to bring warmth to places long cold. And I held her hand tighter, feeling the pulse of life, hope, and fragile forgiveness flowing between us, knowing that while the road ahead would be long, filled with tears, arguments, and rebuilding trust piece by piece, it was a road worth walking. Because finally, after years of silence, anger, and pain, we had found the first trembling thread of connection, and the night once so dark felt like a fragile, trembling promise, a whisper of reconciliation, a first step toward healing, toward rebuilding what was broken, and toward proving that even the deepest wounds, the most bitter misunderstandings, and the longest years of separation could not extinguish the bond between a father and his daughter, a bond rooted in love, sacrifice, and memory, a bond that, though tested by storms, still had the strength to survive, to endure, and to grow once again. As the rain tapered off and the city streets glistened like molten silver, I could feel the years weighing on me, each droplet a reminder of moments lost and chances missed, the countless mornings I had risen before dawn, aching bones and restless mind, to make sure she had breakfast, shoes that fit, a coat against winter, lessons to complete. And yet somehow, despite every effort, every sacrifice, she had grown into a woman armored by pride, independent to a fault, fiercely talented yet stubbornly distant. And as I stood there watching her, I remembered the small victories and quiet tragedies of our shared past. The first school play where she had trembled with fear, and I had whispered encouragement in the wings. Her first heartbreak, when I had sat with her under the flickering porch light, letting her cry on my shoulder without a word. The nights of endless storm where thunder had rattled windows and her tiny hand had gripped mine as if I could shield her from every fear in the world, and yet each memory so vivid clashed violently with the distance she had built around herself, the fortress of resentment and pride that now made her seem a stranger with familiar eyes, the eyes that once sparkled with wonder and mischief, now tempered with caution and resolve. And I thought of the silent dinners, the arguments that escalated over trivialities but hid deeper wounds, the countless times she had stormed out, slamming doors behind her, leaving a hollow ache in the rooms that once held laughter and warmth. And I realized that the pain she carried, though not always visible, was as real and deep as my own, the grief and regret intertwining across the years like invisible threads, pulling us toward confrontation yet keeping us painfully apart. And I felt the ache of every sleepless night I had spent imagining a life where she knew, truly knew, how much I had loved her, how every decision I made, every job I worked, every dollar earned, every sacrifice was not to bind her, not to control her, but to ensure that her dreams, her ambitions, and her safety were never compromised. And now, in this drenched, silent street under amber light, I felt the weight of all that history pressing down. The memories of her first steps, the tiny birthday cakes I had baked with trembling hands, the whispered bedtime stories that sometimes lasted till I fell asleep beside her, the small arguments over homework, chores, and curfews, all blending into a tapestry of love, regret, and hope. And I realized that the distance between us was measured not in streets or years, but in unsaid words, in pride swallowed at the wrong moments, in apologies left unspoken. And I took a step closer, heart pounding, hands trembling, and whispered her name, not as a plea, not as a demand, but as a bridge across the years. Adeline, it's still me. Your father. I've never stopped loving you. And for a moment, the world seemed to pause, the air thick with unspoken history, and I saw her lips quiver, the flash of vulnerability that she had buried under years of ambition, anger, and self-reliance. And I thought of the nights when her mother's absence had left us alone with grief, learning to navigate loss together, yet failing in communication. The days when I had tried to be both mother and father, teacher and protector, friend and guide. The moments of laughter, tears, and quiet reflection that had built the foundation of who she was. And now, watching her hesitate, the careful distance she maintained, I realized that this moment, drenched in rain, soaked in memory, was the first real chance in years to reach her, to break through the walls, to let her see the love that had never wavered despite mistakes, arguments, and the relentless march of time. And as I held my hand out, palm trembling, hoping she would take it, I thought of every misstep, every moment of failure, every harsh word I had spoken in frustration, and I silently apologized for each one, knowing that apologies alone could not erase the years, but could perhaps begin the journey of rebuilding trust. And as our eyes locked, I saw a flicker of recognition, of memory of the child who once ran into my arms without fear, and I whispered again, my voice cracking, "I am here. I always have been, and I always will be." And slowly, tentatively, she lifted her hand, placing it over mine, the touch cold yet electrifying, the pulse of years of love, pain, and hope vibrating between us. And in that single moment, I felt a fragile thread of reconciliation begin to weave itself through the fabric of our lives, a thread that would take months, years, perhaps decades to strengthen, yet undeniable in its presence. And I realized that though pride, fear, and past wounds could delay the healing, they could not extinguish it. That love, patient, enduring, and relentless, had a power that could survive storms, silence, and separation. And as we stood together, rain-soaked and trembling, the city around us a blur of light and shadow, I understood that this was the beginning, the first step in a long journey to reclaim not just a relationship, but the bond that had been buried under the weight of life, distance, and misunderstanding. And I silently vowed that no matter the arguments, the setbacks, or the tears, I would walk that road with her, hand in hand, until the walls crumbled, until trust and understanding took root again, until the laughter, the love, and the shared memories could once again fill the spaces that had been hollow for far too long. And I knew, deep down, that this night, wet with rain and heavy with memory, would mark the turning point, the first real step toward mending the broken threads of our lives, toward a future where father and daughter could navigate the complexities of adulthood, pain, ambition, and love together, not as strangers, not as adversaries, but as family, bound by unbreakable ties that time, distance, and anger could never fully sever.